Welcome to Software Rocks. Let's get this development started. Welcome to Software Rocks, where I'm going to teach you how to take your development from average to amazing. Today, let's get the development started, and something that you can do today to make your development better. Let's get this development started. Where does your company start when you're working on a project? If it's anything like the companies that I've worked at, it goes something like this. The board gets presented with a project, and after some discussion and whatever it is the board does, they finally approve it. A load of promises have been made about what it's going to do and how it will work and how it will absolutely definitely do these things, and a ton of deadlines have been set. Somehow, somebody has managed to see into the future and know exactly when this project is going to get finished. Fantastic. Awesome. Well done. The team that then gets it, usually a non-technical team, spend weeks or even months talking about it, discussing how they want it to go and how it should all fit together, and maybe they'll put it to a couple of other teams to talk about, and sometimes they'll design some of the pages. Then they'll come up with some ideas of what they want to talk to the development team about. Usually it's about a page worth. Maybe they'll come up with a list of epics, usually just the main features. Then they might assign someone to manage it, if you're lucky, or they'll give it to someone who sort of knows a little bit about technology but doesn't really have any power to make decisions, or they'll give it to someone who knows absolutely nothing and has never really run a project before. Then they might put a business analyst on it. They'll go and talk to the business, come up with some ideas, change a few bits, but never really seem to actually flesh out exactly what it should do. And finally, after all of that, it will come to the development team. And the development team will be told, we promised that we'd have this done in about 2 months. Is that okay? Thanks a lot. Bye. And off they go. Somehow they think that all this time that happened in front of the project is a lot harder and takes much more time than actually developing the software. That's something I've never quite understood. If it takes you a month to talk about it, why would you think you could build it in a month? So how does that sound to you? Does that sound like how your company develops software? Is that anything like you've done in the past? How did that work out for you? Has that worked for you? I can tell you one thing, that I've worked on stuff like that, and it's never worked out. It's never worked out at all like that for me. Whenever I've seen something like that, I just sit there scratching my head, just wondering, how did you even come up with this? Why? What's going on here? I remember one spec that I saw that came from a company. They'd spent months talking about it, and we finally got a single sheet of A4 with a list of things they wanted it to do. And number one on that list, the most technical request on that list was must work on the web. That was it. And from that, we had to build the application. Suffice to say that application didn't get built that way. How did we get into this state? And why do we let it continue? I think one of the things about software development teams is fundamentally they want to say yes. They want to work with the business and they want to work hard. And they have a real problem saying no. Other teams, other departments usually don't seem to have a problem saying no, but development teams, especially developers and testers, they like to say yes. If someone comes up to them and says, can you change this? Yes, I can. Can you make this work? But yes, I can change that for you. That's no problem. I think in a lot of cases they need to learn to start saying no. I think that's especially true when it comes to projects. They need to feel they have the backing of the company, in many respects perhaps, and actually feel they have the power to say, no, I'm not going to work on that. You haven't finished thinking about it. Alternatively, they assume that the company must have a good reason for doing something a specific way. If a project's laid out to you and they say we want every time the user presses the enter button, we want the computer to jab the user in the eye. Obviously, you're going to think to yourself, that's a bit strange, but there must be a good reason they've asked for it. And then again, the development team will say, well, why? And normally the response is, well, just because. That's how we wanted it to work. And even when the development team know it's being run poorly, they won't stop it. Because again, they want to please, they want to say yes, they want to get it done. They should really say no, it's not happening. This is one of the areas that Agile is really helping with, because there's a lot of the responsibility is put into the hands of the Scrum Master. And even though the team has the power to say no, and they probably should say no more often, the Scrum Master can be a bit more bullish and actually say things for the team when the team can't say them themselves. What I wanted to do today then is to lay out a different approach. I want to lay out how I like to do software development and how I think it makes a lot more sense than perhaps the previous approaches that we've seen. I'm thinking about doing an episode very soon in the future that talks about how to structure a company around doing software development. I initially wrote it into this episode, but then I realised there's probably a lot more to it than that, and it really goes beyond just the development teams. It reaches up into the structure of the board and how the structure of the company should be changed to allow you to focus on developing stuff for customers. So I've moved that to another episode. So for this one, I want to focus on how should you start a project, how should you focus on it, and how should you get it through and actually get started on it. Step 1. Demand a product owner. Simply, do not allow a project to start without a clear product owner. You mustn't do or agree to any development work unless the business has appointed a product owner. They are responsible for the product. They are responsible for the development. They are responsible for the vision. And they are the person who is the single wringable neck if it all goes wrong. So they hold a lot of power and they need to be empowered to make decisions. Basically, their decision is law as far as the product goes. The board shouldn't be able to question what they've done. Obviously, they can question them later and suggest changes, but if they say something happens this way, then it happened that way. They are responsible. So they need to be empowered. They need to have the authority. Then they also need to be an incredibly technical person. I personally believe that being a product owner is possibly the most technical job in developing software, because not only do you have to understand software and developing software to a reasonable extent. I'm not saying you have to know it as much as software developers, but you have to know it. You have to understand what software development is and how it works and how it all slots together. But you've also got to understand what the customers want. You have to have an understanding of what the company wants. You have to know the company's strategy. You have to know their vision, and you have to be able to clearly lay out your vision. And in some ways, you have to be a very strong individual as well. You've got to know your vision, and you've got to clearly communicate it and be able to talk to it about people and convince them that your way is right, and understand and listen to their points and change when necessary. So the product owner is a very hard job. It's a very technical job, a very fulfilling and rewarding job, but a lot of hard work. Number 1, demand a product owner. Do not start without one. 2, have a clear goal for the product. The project or the product was accepted by the board, or however your company does it, and so it must have very clear objectives. And again, it's the product owner who needs to understand those objectives, and they're basically responsible for them. And it's the product owner's job to guide the project to its completion. That means they're in charge of the stories, they're in charge of the prototypes, they're in charge of the meetings. They are ultimately responsible for everything. So they need to be involved and working hard on this. Again, it's been a case for me in the past. I've worked for a lot of companies where the product owner takes only a passing interest in the product. They'll come to the first few meetings and go, yeah, I want it to look like that, and I want it to look like that. Then you don't see them for weeks on end, and they'll come back and go, no, I don't really like that. Can we just change that? And that's not what a product owner is. You're not owning the product. The product owner is there daily, working with the teams, seeing what they're putting out, making adjustments as necessary, and telling them where they're going wrong and what they need to do. Very different from micromanagement, but that's not this topic. And so it's the product owner's job to do all the planning work up front. They know where they're going. They know what the strategy is. They know what the goals are. They need to involve the people who can help them with the plan, and they then need to lay their ideas out and start working on their plan. Number 3, lay out your ideas. I've broken this into 4 parts. So the first part is roadmap. We've already talked about the roadmap in episode number 3. Are you looking after your roadmap? So if you want to have listened to that one, go to softwarerocks.tv/3 and you can hear me talking about the roadmap and how I think that's incredibly important to developing software and something that people completely miss. I'm not talking about a Gantt chart. I'm not talking about the lovely, pretty diagram that the project manager is going to make. I'm talking about a living document which represents the real thinking of the product owner over the very near term. It can go far into the future, but I'm really interested in the next month, next 3 months, next 6 months. The roadmap needs to break the product down into the increments. Each increment needs to have a date, a name, a goal, the features it's going to hit, and the metrics you intend to measure from it. So this is really going to help you lay out your MVP, your minimum viable product. It's massively important that the very first thing you aim to hit is your MVP. Because if budgets change, if things start to overrun, you want to know you've at least got that minimum product that you can get out, and everything else after that is just enhancements and features on top of that product. You want to hit that point as soon as possible. Now, that's not saying you put that out immediately. You may not. You may keep hold of it, but you need to have it as quickly as you can possibly get it. And the development teams understand this, and they should be working towards it. And this is where your roadmap really helps, because it allows you to lay out, let's say, the next 3 months and say, this is what I hit. This is what I want to hit in the first month. This is what I want to hit in the second month. This is what I want to hit in the third month. And by the time I've got to the end of the third month, we've got a minimum viable product. We can ship that. This isn't a fixed plan, though. This is going to allow you to express your goals and communicate with the development teams and say what it is you're aiming for and what you want. But it's only a roadmap. It's only a guide. It's not set in stone, and it is going to be changing as you go forward. The key to this is it just allows you to communicate what's really important to your development teams, and that's really going to help them. The next part is specification. This is the why and what, not the how. So this isn't big design up front. You're going to hear a lot of stuff in Agile about how you mustn't do big design up front, and they're absolutely right. You mustn't do big design up front. Big design up front is a classic waterfall trait where you try and design out all the technical aspects of your project and bits and pieces before you go anywhere near it. This isn't that. This isn't picking technologies. This isn't setting plans in stone or anything like that. But what this is laying out the building blocks of your application, how you want the project to look. You can talk generally about the look and feel, how you think you want things to be laid out, some UX bits and pieces, what it needs to do, the events it needs to deal with, anything else that is big enough to talk about, at least in an initial sense, because this is only the first part of this document. It's important bits and pieces the development team needs to know. That's what you're aiming for. This is going to be your chance to clearly express what it is you want the system to do, and at least flesh out enough of the first stab at the roadmap. But this is going to be a living document. People are going to change it, not just the product owner, not just you, but the development teams are going to change it, testing teams are going to change it. By the end of this project, that specification should represent the product, so that then if this gets handed to another team, or another team comes along in a few months' time after it's finished to support it, they can look at that document, and that document represents your project. Again, documentation is something a lot of teams shy away from, or some people have some very strange misconceptions around the code is the documentation. The code is the documentation of the code, but the code is not the documentation of the product. The product has a lot more thinking in it, so keep that document up to date. The third type is prototype. This is something that a lot of projects just simply completely miss, and I think they are probably missing the single most important part of laying out and planning a project. The prototype is essential in developing a good product. Mainly because it can be put together by not the most technical people on your team. You might get your UX people to put them together, or the product owner might put them together. A lot of people can potentially put these together, and it could be as simple as just some pictures on a piece of paper. But this is what's going to help you solve problems in your design before it's gone anywhere near the code. Once it has been coded, of course it can still be changed, but that's going to be much more expensive than if you'd caught some of these things before it went anywhere near a development team. So you can use your roadmap as a guide. You've done the hard work. You've really laid out your MVP and what you want to be doing for the next month or two. So you use that to focus on your prototype and focus your prototype down to just what you're going to need for the first or second or third iteration. Just those first few bits. That's all you're interested in. You can do this on paper, but there are a lot of really clever tools out there. I've used Sketchflow in the past. I've seen Fluid and Proto.io. I was having a look at InVision this weekend. I've seen Balsamiq, and there's lots more stuff. There's so many tools out there you can use, and it can make this stuff really easy. This will drive out a lot of your thinking and give you a very clear vision of what you want. You can run this as a small project in its own right before the main project starts. I would shy away from calling this Sprint Zero, as some people call it. I'm having a discussion with people about Sprint Zero at the moment and my opinions on it. And maybe I'll do a separate episode on that. But you can run this as its own project in its own right, and I think you probably should, and you should run it in an agile fashion. You should iterate through designs, you should demo your app to people, you need to get feedback on it, and you might go around that loop a couple of times. But that loop might only be 2 days long, so over the course of a week, you can get through 2 and a bit iterations of your design and be getting feedback from people and refining that idea down. You should be able to show how most of your application will function very, very quickly. And it gives a really good visual representation to your stakeholders to let them actually see what the product is going to do. And as you know, once you show someone how a product actually is going to work, they'll very quickly start giving you ideas and actually expressing what they really want, not what they thought they wanted. But the real benefit for this is you're going to give your developers a clear base to start from. Fingers crossed you can actually get through your prototyping in less than a week. I'd hope you can get through a really long way in a week. But maybe it'll take 2 weeks. But either way, you're going to save yourself an enormous amount of time and an enormous amount of discussion at the other end if you've actually got a prototype that you can show. Again, I'm trying to avoid big design up front. And some people will say this is big design, but I don't think this is big design. I think this is helping the product owner actually lay out and form their ideas much more clearly with the aim of being able to discuss them with the development teams. I'm not saying development teams shouldn't be involved in prototyping. I think they probably should. But what you don't want is a full team of developers not wasting their time, spending their time doing UI and UX, when really you want them coding. Much better to have a single UX designer spend a week or 2 weeks really fleshing out the application before it gets handed to developers. It solves so many questions and gives you back so much time. It's absolutely worth it. So the final part of this is user stories and acceptance criteria. So now you've got a representation of your application. Actually doing your user stories and writing your acceptance criteria should be so much easier. So you've got your list of epics and you've got that from your roadmap. You've now got your representation of your pages and your flow and your layout. You know how that's going to work. So you can create your user stories and nice, really good, meaningful user stories from your prototypes. Give them acceptance criteria. Link the prototype pages, and you're going to have not only pages, but flows through the pages to show how a single user story will go from page to page. Link all that together, and you are going to not only have much better user stories, but you're going to see where you've got gaps in your user stories, where a user story doesn't make sense, or where you thought you'd have a user story, but actually you've covered it with something else, or where a user story is actually much more complex than you initially thought and needs to be broken down into sub-user stories. Again, your development team is going to be so grateful for not only the page layouts and the flows, but the fact that you've been able to spend much more time focused on just being able to express what it is you want, that you're going to find your development's going to go a lot easier. Once you've got through that, it's time for part 4, present your documentation to the team. Fingers crossed by now you've actually involved your development team and they've already got an idea, but this is where you're going to walk them through the vision from start to finish and really explain what it is you're trying to do. You can explain your goals and what you're trying to hit, and obviously relate that back to the roadmap, and relates back to the strategy so they can see what it is you're doing and where you're going and what you're trying to do. You can show them the user stories and walk them through the user stories with the prototypes, because now you've got something visual you can show them as well. And then they're going to give you their feedback. They're going to, fingers crossed, actually see exactly what it is you're talking about and know exactly where they're going. And they're probably going to ask you much more in-depth technical questions, because they don't need to ask you the silly surface level questions about how do you want that to look, how is this going to go, where does this sit, and how all the bits and pieces like that. They're now much more interested in seeing your vision and actually converting that into something that they can really work with. But all the documents we've just talked about there, they're living documents. They're going to be changing as you go on, and you've got to expect them to change. but not just the product owner changing them, not just you changing them. Everybody is going to have a hand in changing them because everybody is working on this together. Once you've got all that, it's time for the kickoff. This is just going to be the start of the project. This is just the bare minimum you need to actually properly start. These documents are going to grow and change as the project goes on. This is only enough to get you started and give a clear vision to the technical teams. Your roadmap is going to provide that bigger picture, and you're going to be turning out more prototypes and user stories as you go on. But you're going to be incorporating what the development teams are saying, and they're going to have their hand in it as well. You're going to get to the end of your sprint, you're going to have your product demo, and you're going to use that to colour what you're going to do next. But because you've been so specific with your roadmap, and because you've been so specific with your prototypes, you're going to find not only does it go a lot quicker, but the feedback is going to be much more focused on improving the product rather than beating around the bush of just how does the UI work. Everything I've talked about there, that's just the most base level of documentation you can do for a product. I'd expect most products out there to be a lot more complex and probably have a lot more stages, probably that have gone on before development, but maybe going on while development is happening, that are feeding into all of this. But those bits and pieces there, that's the key to just starting a project and getting going with it. Next week, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these and I'm going to run us through a project. I'm going to lay out an idea and I'm going to go through these stages and actually write the documentation for them and then talk you through not only the product and the vision and the strategy, but each of the documents, how they get put together, and when and how the different teams can provide feedback into those documents. Again, this is one of those things that I see so many companies falling down on. They just don't know where to start with a product or a project. They don't know how to communicate out. They don't know the things they should be expected to deliver. And it amazes me that companies still don't have these things documented and written down. So I'm going to document and write them down. And fingers crossed, you'll be able to use them in your own project work to actually say to the other people outside the development, the people beyond the product owner, so project managers, board members, this is what we're going to produce and this is what we need if you want us to start working on something. Something you can start doing today. Start working on your project acceptance document. I'm sure that after everything we've talked about there, you can see why it's important that you have actually laid out these bits and pieces in a much more formal fashion than just discussing them with the team. You need to express them in a document that you can give out to other departments and say, if you want us to work on something for you, this is what we expect. It doesn't have to be a huge document. It doesn't have to be a massive overhead. And I think I've shown there that there's only really four key parts that you can get away with at a bare minimum that would be infinitely better than what most development teams already get. And you could go into a massive amount of detail. You can go into much more depth on how you express a user story, how you express acceptance criteria. But I think in most cases it's probably not necessary, but you can if you want to. Put that document together, clearly lay out what it is you expect in order to start. Ask for the product owner to be appointed and explain why the product owner is important, why they must have authority, and why you've got to have them. Explain the supporting documents that they will be responsible for, and explain the supporting documents that you're going to be responsible for. Ensure that they know how to create them. That's incredibly important. So many companies have gone agile, or they say they're going agile, but only the development team is really agile. And even within the development team, and I'm seeing this now, even within the development team, even the development teams don't understand what being agile really means. So if the development teams don't understand it, how is the rest of the company going to understand what you mean when you say you're agile? So explain what it is they have to do. Explain what they're going to need to put in those documents so they know how to create them, where to put them, and what they're for. Most importantly, once you've made that document, you must not accept any projects without them meeting your criteria. There can be no excuse at that point for a department not understanding what it is you need to actually start working on something. This isn't about saying no to the business being difficult to work with. This is expressing the standard that you require the business to hit in order for you to be able to do good work. And that's the most important thing for me. It is the team being able to turn out good work. If they don't get what they need coming in, then they shouldn't be expected to work on it. This is all about valuing the developer's time, valuing the tester's time, valuing the time of all the people involved, and making sure that people outside of the departments, outside of the technical teams, understand that that time is valuable as well, and they have a standard to meet, not just the developers having a standard to meet. So fingers crossed you can get that done, and I'm hoping that that's going to seriously improve the quality of the projects that you get in. Thanks for listening to Software Rocks. For more information and show notes on this episode, please go to softwarerocks.tv/8. Don't forget, if you like the show, please give us a review on iTunes or wherever it is you heard it, and especially leave comments. I love getting comments. It really helps me get the word out, and it helps other people like you find the really good shows out there that they're looking for. If you want to get in touch, if you've got a question to ask or you just got something to say, email me, andrew@softwarerocks.tv, or join the Facebook group, or sign up for the newsletter on softwarerocks.tv/sign up. I've just put up a new bonus for signing up to the newsletter, so you'll get my handout on the 5 challenges to starting Agile the books don't tell you about. So sign up for the newsletter, get that. And finally, you can follow me on Twitter @AndrewBinstead. Thanks for listening, and I hope your development just got a little bit better. Welcome to Software Rocks. Well, I'm going to... First bloody thing I say. So. There's another so. And so you get these... So there was a little so in there. Got it that time. So. So number 3. So the roadmap. So there's another so. Once you've got through that, it's time for part 4. Present your documentation. So once you've got all that. So put that document together. So there was a so again.